The rain poured down torrentially over Willow Creek that night. The small town, known for its gentle hills and winding roads lined with trees, felt like a place untouched by time. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and where simple stories unfolded like the lazy clouds in the sky. But that night, something extraordinary was about to begin. Jack Miller was driving his old Ford pickup, the sound of the engine muffled by the drumming of rain on the hood. He was coming off a long day at the shop, tuning engines and helping locals with their vehicles. When he saw a pair of headlights flashing on the shoulder of the deserted road, he didn't think twice. Pulling over, he grabbed his flashlight. The car, a sleek black luxury sedan, was stranded in a puddle of water. Inside, a blonde woman with her hair tied back in an elegant bun was unsuccessfully fiddling with her phone. As Jack approached, she rolled down the window, revealing tired but grateful eyes. "Need some help?" he asked, his unmistakable southern drawl cutting through the rain. I think the car died. The engine just stopped and I can't get a signal on my phone," she said, hugging her arms as if to keep the cold at bay. Jack assessed the situation with a practiced eye. It didn't take long for him to figure out that the car's electrical system had failed. Grabbing a few tools from his truck, he improvised a fix, and in less than 15 minutes, the engine roared back to life. "There you go, you're good to go," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Thank you. Really, I don't know what I would have done without you. How much do I owe you?" Jack chuckled softly. "Help doesn't come with a price tag, ma'am. Just drive safe, especially in this rain." She smiled, hesitated for a moment, and then asked, "What's your name?" "Jack. Jack Miller," he said with a simple nod before heading back to his truck. The woman waved as she watched him drive off, her car engine purring with renewed strength. By Sunday morning, the sky had cleared, and the sun cast golden rays over Willow Creek's rolling hills. Jack, still a bit groggy, was on his porch, a hot cup of coffee in hand, and the sound of birds chirping in the background. His house was modest, with wooden siding and a garage overflowing with parts and tools. He liked the simplicity of it all. Suddenly, a deafening noise shattered the peace. Jack frowned, set his coffee on the side table and walked out onto the lawn to investigate. He couldn't believe what he saw. A black helicopter descending slowly, its blades kicking up dust and leaves. The helicopter landed just a few yards from his house. A side door opened, and to his surprise, the woman he had helped 2 days earlier stepped out, now dressed in a sleek grey coat. Beside her was a tall man with a rigid posture and dark sunglasses. Jack crossed his arms, both confused and wary. "What's going on here?" The woman walked toward him with determined steps, though her expression showed visible discomfort. "Jack, I'm sorry for showing up like this unannounced. My name is Evelyn Harper and I need your help." Jack laughed dryly. "You've got a helicopter. I don't think I'm the kind of person who can help someone like you." Evelyn glanced at Marcus, the man beside her, as if seeking support. He gave a slight nod and began speaking in a low, measured voice. "Mr. Miller, we're not here by chance. Something you fixed recently has come to our attention, and we believe you're the only person who can help us solve a potentially dangerous problem." Jack shook his head, perplexed. "Dangerous? I'm just a mechanic. I don't see how I can be of any use." Evelyn stepped closer, her eyes now serious as they locked onto Jack's. "Please, Jack, this could save my life." Jack stood on his porch, eyeing the woman and the man in front of him, with a mix of skepticism and irritation. Their presence was already unsettling, but the helicopter on his lawn made everything feel even more surreal. "Look, I think you've come to the wrong house, Hilton," he said, crossing his arms. "I'm just a mechanic. I have no idea what you want with me." Evelyn stepped forward, her expression serious. "Jack, we know you recently repaired something for a man who came to your shop. An unusual device, electronic. Does that ring a bell?" Jack frowned, his mind racing to recall. It didn't take long. A few days ago, a man had shown up at Miller's Auto Repair with a broken device, something that looked pretty sophisticated. He said it was specialized equipment and needed a quick fix. Jack, true to his usual style of not asking too many questions, did the job, took the cash payment, and watched the man leave. "Maybe," Jack said warily, "but I don't ask questions about what people bring me. If they pay, I fix it." The man next to Evelyn, who had an imposing stance and a piercing gaze, intervened. "The device you repaired is called the Nexus. It was stolen from Harper Industries a few weeks ago, and part of the repair work was traced back to your shop." Jack let out a disbelieving laugh. "Wait a minute, you're saying this Nexus thing was in my shop?" Evelyn nodded, her gaze steady. "Yes. And now it's in the hands of dangerous people." "Jack, what you did was legally harmless, but you may have inadvertently helped criminals." Jack felt his stomach churn. He'd always been careful to steer clear of trouble, but it seemed like he'd walked right into it this time. "Look, I didn't know what that thing was. I was just doing my job." "We know," Evelyn replied quickly. her tone almost conciliatory. "We're not here to accuse you, but you're the only person who's had direct contact with the device since it was stolen. We need your help to track down who brought it to you and where it might be now." Jack hesitated. His simple life, centered around engines and parts, had not prepared him for anything like this. But there was something in Evelyn's eyes, a sincerity mixed with desperation, that made him reconsider. "All right," he said with a sigh. "I remember the guy. I didn't ask his name, but I remember his face and the car he drove." Evelyn gave a brief, relieved smile. "That's a start. Can you tell us what else you remember?" "Sure," Jack replied. "But just to be clear, I don't get involved in anything illegal." Marcus, the man next to Evelyn, responded with a faint smile. "Helping us resolve this is the best way to make sure it stays that way." A short while later, Jack was seated in his modest living room, surrounded by Evelyn and Marcus. Their presence felt out of place in the simple space, with its worn furniture and scattered tools. Evelyn opened a tablet and began taking notes on what Jack said. "He came to the shop about 3 days ago," Jack began. "He was a guy in his 40s, wearing a cap and with a scruffy beard. He seemed nervous, but not overly so." "What else?" Marcus asked, his tone firm and direct. Jack scratched his head, trying to remember. "His car was an old truck, a blue 90s Chevy. He said he needed to fix some electronic equipment and asked if I knew my way around circuits." "And you took the job?" Evelyn asked. "I did. It was pretty specific, but not too complicated for me. I made the repairs, tested it to make sure it worked, and he paid me in cash." He didn't say much else. Evelyn exchanged a meaningful glance with Marcus before turning back to Jack. "Can you describe the equipment?" "Well, it looked kind of military. It had some connectors that aren't common in regular electronics. I didn't ask questions because honestly it wasn't my business." Evelyn nodded, typing quickly on the tablet. "That confirms our suspicions. The man was likely fine-tuning the Nexus before transporting it." "You mentioned the truck. Do you remember the license plate or any other details?" Jack thought for a moment, squinting as if searching his memory. "I didn't see the license plate, but I remember there was a dent on the passenger side, and it had one of those old political campaign stickers on the bumper." Evelyn glanced at Marcus, who nodded slightly. "That might help us track it down. We can cross-reference this with local records." Jack shook his head, still incredulous that he was caught up in something like this. "Listen, I just fixed the thing. I'm not a spy, not an investigator. Why do you need me so much?" Evelyn looked at him seriously. "Because the people who stole the Nexus won't stop until they use it. And you're the only direct connection we have to the person who transported it." Jack sighed, knowing there was no way to escape the situation. He didn't like trouble, but he also wasn't the kind of person to leave someone in a bind. "All right," he finally said. "I'll help you, but I don't know how long I can be away before my shop falls apart without me." Evelyn offered a brief smile. "We'll try to resolve this as quickly as possible." Marcus stood up, already checking something on his phone. "The next step is finding the man with the truck. We'll keep you safe in the meantime, Jack." Jack simply nodded, feeling like his life had just changed forever. The silence in Jack's house was broken by the steady sound of Evelyn typing on her tablet. Marcus, always vigilant, was making quick phone calls in the corner of the room, while Jack watched it all with a mix of curiosity and discomfort. He still couldn't believe he was caught up in something so complex and dangerous. "What happens now?" Jack asked, trying to mask his anxiety. Evelyn looked up from her tablet. "With the information you gave us, we'll try to track down the man who brought the Nexus to you. Marcus is cross-referencing the details with regional vehicle records. An old truck with a dent is a helpful lead, but it might take some time." Jack huffed, impatient. "I know I did my part by fixing that thing, but I still don't understand why you need me for anything else. You've got technology, helicopters, all of that." Marcus ended his call and turned to Jack, his deep voice cutting through the room. "The problem isn't a lack of resources, it's time. That device could be activated or transported out of the country at any moment. The faster we act, the better." "Great," Jack said, still confused. "But that doesn't tell me how I can help from here on out." Evelyn stepped in with a calmer tone. "Jack, you might be the only person this man trusts. He came to you once, which means he sees you as approachable or safe. If we find him, you might be able to get more information without raising suspicion." Jack felt his stomach churn. He never wanted to get involved in anything like this. His life was simple, and he liked it that way. But for some reason, Evelyn's sincerity made him feel like saying no wasn't an option. "All right," he said after thinking for a moment, "but if I'm going to keep helping you, I need to know one thing. How dangerous could this get?" Evelyn hesitated but answered firmly, "It could get very dangerous, Jack. I won't lie. But we'll do everything we can to protect you." A few hours later, Marcus returned with an expression that suggested progress. "We've located a truck matching the description. It's registered to a man named Peter Caldwell, living in a suburb about 50 miles from here. Evelyn stood immediately. That's enough to get started, Jack frowned. What does that mean? You're going to him. Marcus stared at him, serious. No, we are, and you're coming too. Oh. Hold on, Jack raised his hands. You want me to walk into the lion's den? It won't be that dangerous, Evelyn replied, trying to reassure him. We'll be careful. You just need to confirm that it's the right guy. And what if he recognizes me? Jack asked, worried. He won't, Marcus said confidently. Guys like him deal with a lot of suppliers and techs. He probably doesn't even remember you. Jack took a deep breath. He wanted to say no, but he knew he wouldn't have peace until this situation was resolved. Fine. But if this goes south, I'm out. Deal, Evelyn said with a small smile. That very night, they headed to the address listed for Peter Caldwell. It was a small, secluded property with an improvised workshop next to a modest house. The place was poorly lit, but they could see a blue pickup truck parked near the entrance, dented just as Jack had described. Marcus parked the car at a distance, turning off the headlights. He handed Jack a small communication device. You're going into the workshop. Just confirm if the device is there or if he still has anything connected to the Nexus. We'll be monitoring everything and ready to step in if needed. Jack let out a nervous sigh. This sounds a lot more dangerous than it won't be. Evelyn lightly touched his shoulder. We've got your back, I promise. He got out of the car and approached the workshop with slow, deliberate steps, trying to act natural. The door was slightly ajar, and flickering fluorescent lights illuminated the inside. As he stepped in, he saw Peter Caldwell, the man who'd handed him the Nexus days earlier, hunched over a workbench cluttered with electronic parts. Hey, sorry to barge in, Jack said, forcing a casual tone. I heard you might need some help with equipment. Peter quickly looked up, visibly surprised but not hostile. Who sent you? Oh, I heard from a client that you work on some interesting stuff here. I'm a mechanic and electronics tech. Thought I could be of use. Peter studied him for a few seconds, then returned to what he was doing. I don't need any help right now. Jack noticed something familiar on the workbench, a metallic casing he recognized as part of the Nexus. Trying not to be too obvious, he nodded toward it. That looks complicated. Peter gave a wary smile. It is. Very specific work, not for just anyone. Jack nodded, trying not to show his nerves. Well, if you change your mind, you know where to find me. He turned and walked out of the workshop, his heart racing. As soon as he got back to the car, Evelyn and Marcus were waiting anxiously. What did you find out? Evelyn asked. Jack took a deep breath. He still has the Nexus. From what I saw, he's working on something else, but I couldn't tell exactly what. Marcus nodded. That confirms we're in the right place. Now we just have to figure out our next move. Jack looked at the two of them, feeling like he was getting in deeper. Whatever you're planning, just make sure it doesn't involve helicopters on my lawn again. Evelyn smirked slightly. No promises. Back in the car, the silence was heavy. Jack felt the weight of the situation as Evelyn and Marcus debated their next move. Confirming that Peter Caldwell still had the Nexus was crucial, but the question now was how to retrieve it without putting anyone in danger. He didn't seem aggressive, but he's clearly hiding something, Jack said, breaking the silence. Do you think he's working for someone? Evelyn sighed, her gaze lost in the darkness outside. Probably. My father used to say there were people interested in the Nexus for reasons beyond technology. Governments, criminal organizations, all with dark intentions. Marcus, who was behind the wheel, kept his voice steady and direct. It doesn't matter who he's working for. Our priority is to recover the device before he hands it over to anyone. Jack scoffed, still uncomfortable with the idea of being involved. Do you even have a plan? Or am I getting thrown back in there again? Marcus smirked slightly, his expression half challenging. This time, we're going to be more direct. He's alone now, but we don't know for how long. We need to act fast. Evelyn stepped in with a more conciliatory tone. Jack, we're not going to put you in danger. Marcus and I will go into the workshop while you stay here in the car and guide us through the radio. Right. And what if he reacts badly? Jack asked, concerned. Marcus looked at him seriously. If that happens, we'll deal with it. Jack wanted to argue, but he knew it wouldn't make a difference. He leaned back in his seat and put on the communication headset Evelyn handed him. The plan seemed simple. Go in, grab the device, and get out before Caldwell had a chance to react. Simple on paper, but reality was always different. Marcus parked the car a bit farther from the workshop, hiding it behind some trees. He and Evelyn equipped themselves with small radios and discreet flashlights, ready for the mission. We'll go around the side, Marcus said, leading the way. Evelyn followed close behind, with Jack monitoring everything through the radio. Inside the car, Jack's heart was racing. He wasn't the kind of person used to this sort of operation. What am I even doing here, he thought, listening to Marcus and Evelyn's cautious steps through the headset. We're at the side entrance, Marcus reported over the radio. All clear? Jack asked. For now, yes, Evelyn replied. Outside, Marcus carefully opened the workshop's side door, the sound of the rusty hinge echoing in the quiet surroundings. Inside, the flickering light above Peter Caldwell's workbench illuminated the clutter. The place was a mess with scattered parts and abandoned tools. Evelyn approached the table where the Nexus lay. Part of the device was disassembled, but its main structure remained intact. She gestured to Marcus, signaling they needed to move quickly. I found the Nexus, she said into the radio. It's here. Jack exhaled in relief from the car. Great. Now just grab it and get out. But before Evelyn could touch the device, a sound broke the silence. Rapid footsteps echoed down the corridor, and Peter Caldwell appeared at the doorway. He held a wrench, his eyes wide as he spotted the intruders. Who the hell are you? He shouted, raising the tool as if it were a weapon. Marcus stepped forward, raising his hands in a calming gesture. Peter, we don't want to hurt you. We just want what's on the table. You have no idea what you're doing, Peter yelled, his voice shaky but resolute. If you take it, the people I work for will come after me. And if we don't take it, they'll use it for something much worse, Evelyn said, her voice firm but not hostile. Peter, it doesn't have to be this way. You can get out of this. Jack, hearing everything over the radio, felt his stomach churn. He wanted to intervene, but he knew it was pointless. Is he going to attack? Jack whispered into the radio, anxious. Not yet, Marcus replied. Peter seemed to hesitate, but his eyes were filled with fear. You don't understand. I can't just hand it over. They know where I live. They know where my family is. Evelyn stepped closer, her expression softening. Peter, we're trying to stop more people from getting hurt. If you help us, I promise we'll find a way to protect you and your family. For a moment, the room was silent, broken only by the sound of Peter's heavy breathing. Finally, he lowered the wrench and took a step back. You don't know what you're up against, he muttered, but pointed at the Nexus. Take it, but if anything goes wrong, don't say I didn't warn you. Evelyn carefully picked up the device, while Marcus kept his eyes on Peter, ready for any sudden move. Thank you, Peter, Evelyn said sincerely. They began moving toward the exit, the Nexus in hand. Jack sighed in relief as he heard they were leaving. All good over there? He asked over the radio. Yeah, we're on our way out, Evelyn replied. But just as they were about to leave the workshop, a distant sound echoed through the air. Evelyn stopped, her body tense. What was that? Jack asked, his voice full of concern. Someone's coming, Marcus answered darkly. Looks like Peter wasn't working alone. Silence filled the car as Evelyn and Marcus weighed their next steps. Jack, seated in the back, crossed his arms with a suspicious expression. Though they had located Peter Caldwell and the Nexus, the thought of confronting the man still seemed far too risky. Are you sure he's the right guy? Jack asked, looking at Evelyn through the rearview mirror. She nodded slowly. Peter used to work for Harper Industries. He was the lead engineer on one of our cybersecurity defense projects, but was fired a few years ago for reckless behavior. At the time, my father suspected he was leaking confidential information to third parties. Jack frowned. So you already knew he was dangerous? We didn't have proof back then, Marcus cut in, his deep voice sharp. Now we know he's involved in the Nexus theft. And if Peter still has the device, it means he's more than just a middleman. Jack sighed, shaking his head. So how do you plan on getting the Nexus? He doesn't seem like the type to just hand it over. Evelyn took a deep breath before answering. We'll talk to him first. Peter isn't a common criminal. He's someone who once believed in my father's vision. Maybe we can convince him he's on the wrong path. And if he doesn't cooperate? Jack asked, skeptical. Then we go to Plan B, Marcus said curtly. When they arrived at Peter's workshop, the place felt more threatening than before. The dim lighting and chaotic surroundings gave the impression that something darker was at play. Marcus parked the car far from the main entrance, and they proceeded on foot with cautious steps. Stay in the car, Jack, Marcus said as he adjusted the comm device in his ear. If anything goes wrong, you let us know. Right, but I don't expect this to go smoothly, Jack replied, clearly uneasy. Marcus and Evelyn entered the workshop through a side door that was slightly ajar. Inside, the sound of tools and machinery filled the air. In the center of the cluttered space, Peter Caldwell was working intently at a bench, focused on precise adjustments to the Nexus. He didn't notice their presence until Evelyn cleared her throat, catching his attention. Peter turned abruptly, his expression shifting from surprise to a mix of guilt and irritation. Evelyn Harper, he said, letting out a short, bitter laugh. What are you doing here? I came to take what's mine, she replied directly. The Nexus doesn't belong to you, Peter. He raised an eyebrow, stepping back slightly toward the workbench. It belongs to Harper Industries, right? The same company that threw me away after years of dedication? I owe you nothing. Evelyn stayed calm, though her voice carried firmness. "Peter, I know what happened in the past. I know you feel wronged, but that doesn't justify what you're doing now. You're putting lives at risk." Peter laughed bitterly. "Wronged? Your father tossed me aside like I was disposable, even after I contributed more than anyone else to his projects. And now you come here to lecture me?" Marcus stepped forward, cutting in. "Peter, we know you're not working alone. Whoever hired you will discard you the moment they get what they want. Cooperate with us, and we can guarantee your safety." "Safety?" Peter sneered. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. The Nexus isn't yours anymore. It belongs to people who understand its true value." Evelyn tried again. "Peter, please. You were someone my father trusted. Someone who wanted to change the world for the better. There's still time to do the right thing." For a moment, Peter seemed to hesitate, but his expression quickly hardened and he shook his head. "It's too late for that, Evelyn. I'm not handing the Nexus over to you." Before Marcus could react, Peter pressed a button on his workbench and a shrill siren filled the room. Suddenly, 2 armed men appeared at the entrance, glaring menacingly at Evelyn and Marcus. "So, this is how you're playing it?" Marcus said with a hint of irony. Peter retreated behind the armed men, his tone defiant. "You should have stayed out of this. Now I suggest you leave before someone gets hurt." Evelyn and Marcus exchanged a quick look. It was clear that negotiating wasn't going to work anymore. "Jack, we have a situation here," Evelyn said into the radio. Jack, listening from the car, felt his stomach churn. "What's happening?" "Peter's got company," Marcus replied, "and they don't look friendly." Jack glanced toward the workshop, fighting the urge to rush in. He knew he wasn't cut out for situations like this, but something inside him urged him to act. "I need you to cover me," Marcus said, adjusting his radio. "Evelyn, stay behind me." The 2 armed men started moving, trying to flank Marcus and Evelyn. The tension in the room grew, and the sound of the siren only amplified the gravity of the situation. "Jack, get out if anything goes wrong," Evelyn said urgently over the radio, but Jack didn't respond. He was already opening the car door. Jack stepped out, his feet hitting the dirt firmly as his heart raced. He knew this was insane. He wasn't a soldier, a spy, or anything like that. He was just a mechanic who had suddenly found himself in way over his head, yet something in his conscience wouldn't let him run. "Jack, where are you?" Evelyn's urgent voice came over the radio. "I'm on my way," he replied, gripping the small device in his trembling hand. "If you think I'm going to sit this out, you're crazy." Inside the workshop, Marcus was carefully assessing the situation. The 2 armed men looked more intimidating than skilled, but their presence made any move risky. Evelyn, hiding behind a stack of boxes, kept her eyes on Peter, who was watching the scene unfold with a nervous smile. "You're cornered," Peter taunted, "and my friends outside aren't going to like this one bit." Marcus narrowed his eyes. "Friends, huh? And they're on their way?" "Maybe they are, maybe they aren't," Peter replied, raising his hands in a mocking gesture. "But I bet you don't want to find out." Meanwhile, Jack had reached the side entrance of the workshop and saw the scene unfolding. He crouched down, hiding behind a pile of parts, trying to assess his options. He had no weapons but a good understanding of mechanics. Looking around, his attention was drawn to a small toolbox on the floor, next to a set of compressed gas cylinders. "Okay, Jack, think," he muttered to himself. Grabbing a wrench and one of the gas hoses, he quickly got to work, assembling an improvised connection. Back in the center of the workshop, one of the armed men began moving toward Marcus, pointing his gun at him. "Let's finish this," the man said. Marcus stayed still, waiting for the right moment to act. But before the man could take another step, a sharp, explosive sound echoed through the workshop. A cloud of gas began to fill the space, thick and suffocating. "What the hell is this?" Peter yelled, covering his face. Jack appeared on the other side of the workshop, holding a wrench and shouting, "Looks like you've got a ventilation problem." The distraction was enough for Marcus to disarm the first man with a swift move, followed by a punch that knocked him to the ground. The second man, disoriented by the smoke, fired a shot that ricocheted off the metal walls but was quickly subdued by Marcus. Evelyn ran over to Jack, clutching the Nexus tightly. "Are you insane? What are you doing here?" "Saving you, apparently," Jack replied, breathless. Peter, still coughing from the smoke, tried to escape through the back door, but Marcus was faster, grabbing him by the arm. "Not a chance, Caldwell," Marcus said firmly. Peter looked at him, desperate. "You don't understand. They're already coming for me. You have no idea who's involved in this." Evelyn approached, her eyes fixed on Peter. "Then tell us, who's behind this? Who wants the Nexus?" Peter hesitated, his eyes darting between Marcus and Evelyn. He seemed to be battling internally, but finally gave in. "I was working for a private group, funded by foreign investors. They promised me protection and enough money to disappear, but after I finished the initial work on the Nexus, They started pressuring me. They wanted more, total control. And control of what? Evelyn asked, increasingly worried. Peter swallowed hard. Defense systems, energy grids, anything connected to digital infrastructure. The Nexus is the key to it all. Hearing this, Jack felt a chill run down his spine. Are you serious? They can control everything with this thing? If they get the rest of the components, yes, Peter confirmed. But they still need me to calibrate the system. Marcus let go of Peter, but kept a stern gaze on him. And where are the other components? Peter shook his head nervously. I don't know. They keep that information separate to make sure no one has full control. Evelyn took a deep breath, the weight of the situation clearly sinking in. So if they still need you, that means we have a chance. Marcus nodded, adjusting his radio to contact his external team. We've recovered the Nexus, but we need to move out now. As Marcus tied up the armed men with improvised ropes, Jack and Evelyn prepared the Nexus for transport. The smoke still lingered in the air, obscuring vision, but giving them an advantage. We'll take the back route, Marcus said, leading the group. What about Peter? Jack asked. Evelyn hesitated before answering. He's coming with us. We can't leave him here. Peter didn't protest. He looked relieved to have a chance to escape the mess he had created. The group exited through the back door of the workshop, walking quickly toward the parked car. But before they could reach it, the sound of engines in the distance echoed through the night. They got here faster than we expected, Marcus said, narrowing his eyes as he spotted headlights in the distance. Evelyn gripped the Nexus tighter. What do we do now? Jack looked at her and the group, taking a deep breath before answering. I think it's time to improvise again. The headlights of the vehicles were advancing rapidly along the dirt road toward them. The growing roar of the engines made it clear the people after the Nexus weren't there to talk. Evelyn looked at Jack, who seemed to be juggling 1,000 thoughts at once, while Marcus remained calm, the way someone used to high-pressure situations would. We're going to need a plan now, Jack said, his voice tense. Get in the car now, Marcus ordered. Everyone rushed to the vehicle parked behind the trees. Evelyn climbed into the back seat with Peter, while Jack took the passenger seat. Marcus started the engine, and the car sped down the dirt road, tires skidding as the headlights of the pursuers grew closer. How many of them are there? Evelyn asked, looking back. Jack glanced at the rearview mirror and counted at least 3 vehicles. 3 trucks, and they're closing in fast. Marcus didn't respond, keeping his focus on the road as he maneuvered around rocks and potholes. We need a distraction, he said, without taking his eyes off the path. Jack thought for a moment, then opened the glove compartment and pulled out a small map of the area. We're close to the valley, right? There's a turnoff that leads to an old bridge. It's risky, but it might give us an edge. Marcus nodded. Tell me when to turn. Marcus's car zigzagged along the narrow road, while the pursuers' trucks drew closer. One of the vehicles sped up, attempting to overtake them on the side. The man in the passenger seat rolled down the window and aimed a gun at Marcus's car tires. They're going to shoot, Evelyn shouted, clutching the Nexus to her chest. Before the man could fire, Marcus swerved sharply, sending up a cloud of dust that temporarily blinded the pursuers. Nice move, but they won't give up that easily, Jack said, gripping the dashboard as the car jolted. The turnoff is just ahead, he shouted, pointing to a fork in the road. Marcus quickly veered, taking the narrow path toward the bridge. The area was dimly lit, with tall trees casting ominous shadows in the moonlight. Is this road safe? Evelyn asked, glancing at Jack. Not really, he admitted. The bridge over the river is old, but it should hold our weight. Probably, Evelyn let out a nervous laugh. Probably isn't exactly comforting. As they pressed on, the trucks behind them also took the turnoff. It was clear the pursuers had no intention of stopping. Jack looked at the back seat and spotted a backpack with tools and cables. An idea came to him. Marcus, I need you to slow down for a few seconds. Are you crazy? They're right on our tail, Marcus replied, gripping the wheel tightly. Just trust me, Jack insisted, already reaching for the backpack. Reluctantly, Marcus slowed down just enough for Jack to open the window and toss something onto the road. It was a steel cable coiled around a small device he'd improvised moments earlier. When the first truck rolled over it, the cable caught on the vehicle's axle, causing it to lose control and swerve violently off the road. One down, Jack shouted, sliding back into his seat with a tense smile. Evelyn looked at him impressed. That was incredible. We've still got 2 behind us, Marcus said, hitting the gas again. The remaining 2 vehicles continued to pursue them relentlessly. The old bridge was now visible up ahead, a narrow, rusted structure that looked like it was barely holding together. Is that it? Marcus asked incredulously. Yeah, that's the one, Jack confirmed, eyeing the structure with a mix of hope and fear. Marcus didn't hesitate. He sped up, crossing the bridge carefully but quickly. The planks creaked under the car's weight, and Evelyn held her breath, clutching the Nexus tightly. The trucks didn't hesitate to follow. As the first vehicle started crossing, Jack glanced at Marcus with a desperate idea forming in his mind. "We have to bring the bridge down before the second truck crosses." "Are you insane?" Evelyn exclaimed. "If they catch up to us, we're done for," Jack argued. Marcus assessed the situation and finally agreed. As soon as they were off the bridge, he slammed the brakes and turned the car around. Jack leapt out, grabbing the small compressed gas cylinder he'd used earlier in the workshop. He sprinted to the base of the bridge, adjusting the cylinder's valve to create a rapid leak. "Jack, what are you doing?" Evelyn shouted, worried. "Just trust me," he yelled back, lighting a makeshift torch and tossing it at the cylinder. Within seconds, an explosion echoed across the bridge, collapsing part of its structure. The first truck, already nearly across, barely made it to the other side, but the second plunged straight into the river below. "That should slow them down," Jack said, climbing back into the car as Marcus hit the gas again. After several minutes of tense silence, Marcus finally spoke. "Looks like we bought ourselves some time, but it's not over. They know where Peter was." Jack glanced at Evelyn, who was clutching the Nexus with a worried expression. "What do we do now?" he asked. Evelyn took a deep breath, staring at the device in her hands. "We need a safe place to analyze the Nexus, and we need to figure out who's funding these men before it's too late." Marcus nodded. "I know a place, an old hideout I used years ago. It's a few hours from here." Jack let out a long sigh, his body finally relaxing a bit. "I hope this hideout has coffee. I'm gonna need a serious energy boost after this." Evelyn let out a small laugh, despite the tension still lingering in the air. "After what you pulled off today, Jack, I think you've earned more than just coffee." As the car disappeared into the darkness, they all knew the worst was yet to come. The road stretched endlessly as Marcus guided the car through the dark hills. Jack, exhausted, stared at the horizon through the windshield, while Evelyn held the Nexus tightly in her trembling hands. Peter Caldwell sat silently in the back seat, his expression shifting between guilt and fear. "So, this hideout," Jack said, trying to break the uneasy silence. "It's an isolated cabin on the edge of a national park," Marcus replied. "It was used by CIA operatives in the past. No one will find us there." Evelyn nodded but seemed uneasy. "We have to act fast. Every second the Nexus is in our hands is another second they're tracking us." Jack turned to Peter, his irritation clear in his voice. "And you? Is there anything else you're hiding from us, or should we expect more trucks popping out of nowhere?" Peter looked up, guilt written all over his face. I've told you everything I know. These men don't mess around. They threatened me to make sure I handed over the Nexus, but I don't know exactly who they are." "That's not very helpful," Jack replied, frustrated. "We're risking our necks for something we don't even fully understand." Evelyn stepped in, her voice calmer. "Jack, this is bigger than any of us. If we can figure out how they plan to use the Nexus, we can stop them." Marcus sped down the winding road, swerving to avoid a fallen tree in their path. "We don't know who's funding this, but if Peter's right about the systems the Nexus can control, we're dealing with something that could shift the global balance." "Great. Just another average Tuesday for me," Jack muttered, crossing his arms. 2 hours later, the group arrived at the cabin. It was a small, unassuming wooden structure surrounded by tall, dense trees. The isolation was complete. The single access trail was covered with leaves and branches, suggesting no one had been there for a long time. "Welcome to tranquility," Marcus said, opening the door and switching on a flashlight. The cabin's interior was basic but functional. A wooden table, a few chairs, and a shelf with old equipment that Marcus began to inspect. Evelyn carefully placed the Nexus on the table, while Jack surveyed the place skeptically. "This looks straight out of a cheap spy movie," he said. "I hope it at least has coffee." Marcus pointed to an old gas stove in the corner. "Knock yourself out," Jack scoffed but went to the stove while Marcus and Evelyn focused on the Nexus. Peter sat silently in a corner, visibly uncomfortable. "What exactly did you do at Harper Industries?" Jack asked, turning to him. Peter looked up, hesitating before replying. "I worked with Evelyn's father on advanced technology development. He trusted me to lead the most sensitive projects. And now you're on the other side, helping hand over this tech to criminals?" Jack said accusingly. Peter sighed. "It's not that simple. I lost everything after I was fired. These people offered me a chance to start over and I took it. I didn't know it would end up like this." Evelyn, who had been listening while examining the Nexus, turned to him with a serious expression. "My father trusted you. You could have sought help, but you chose the easy way out." Peter didn't reply, looking away. As Marcus and Evelyn carefully disassembled the Nexus, Jack approached, curious. "Any idea what you're looking for?" Evelyn nodded. "The Nexus has components that allow remote access to critical systems. If we can identify the code or configurations Peter adjusted, we can trace who's trying to use it." "Sounds complicated," Jack said, eyeing the circuits. It is complicated, Marcus replied, but if we succeed, we'll have a solid lead. After nearly an hour, Evelyn exclaimed, "Here it is. We found an encrypted access key." "And what does that mean?" Jack asked, confused. "It means the Nexus has already been configured to connect to a specific system," Evelyn explained. "If we can decode it, we'll know their target." Peter, hearing this, finally spoke. "They mentioned something about critical infrastructure, power, communications, but I didn't have access to all the details." Evelyn was furiously typing on a laptop Marcus had brought, trying to decode the access key. If they gain access to power grids, they could take down entire cities, or worse, Marcus added. They could control military networks, airports, anything connected digitally. Jack ran a hand over his face, feeling the weight of the situation. This just keeps getting better. Suddenly the laptop emitted a sound, and Evelyn's eyes widened. "Got it. It's connected to a network. Looks like it's a facility in the southern part of the state." "A facility?" Jack asked. "What kind?" Evelyn analyzed the data for a moment before replying. "It's a power substation. They're trying to use the Nexus to access the central control of the electrical grid. Then we need to get there," Marcus said, closing the laptop and standing up. Jack looked at him incredulously. "Get there? You think it's going to be that simple?" Marcus stared back at Jack, his expression serious. "We don't have a choice. If we don't act now, it might be too late." Evelyn nodded, standing as well. "Jack, I know you didn't sign up for this, but we need your help." Jack let out a long sigh before responding. "Fine, but next time I expect an adventure with fewer explosions and more answers." And so the group prepared for their next mission, knowing time was against them, and that the Nexus was just the beginning of something much bigger. The cabin was silent as everyone prepared to leave. Marcus did a final check of the equipment they had brought, while Evelyn reviewed the decoded data from the Nexus. Jack, still processing everything, felt the growing tension in the air. "Let's go over the plan," Marcus said, looking up at the group. "The power substation is about 120 miles from here. We have a few hours before they can activate the Nexus remotely." "And what happens if they do?" Jack asked, still incredulous about being involved in all this. "A statewide blackout at the very least," Evelyn replied. "But if they escalate to other networks, it could trigger a cascading collapse. Essential services like hospitals and transportation would go down." Jack sighed, rubbing his face with his hands. "Are you sure you can't call the FBI or something? And give them time to cover everything up?" Marcus responded firmly. "This has to be handled now and quietly." Peter Caldwell, who had remained silent since the revelation, finally spoke. "They have armed guards at every facility. It won't be easy to get in, let alone disable the Nexus." Evelyn looked at him, her expression serious. "That's why you're coming with us. You know the system better than anyone." Peter hesitated, but eventually nodded slowly. "Fine, but if I get killed because of this, just know I'll haunt you all." "Very reassuring," Jack muttered, taking a radio that Marcus handed him. The group departed shortly after, with Marcus behind the wheel once again. The car sped down desolate roads surrounded by dark forests. Evelyn sat in the front seat, going over the information on her laptop, while Jack and Peter shared the back seat. "Any idea how we're going to get into that facility?" Jack asked, breaking the tense silence. "Not yet," Marcus replied, his eyes still fixed on the road. "But Peter will have to open the doors for us." "Hold on a second," Jack said, leaning forward. "You're assuming he won't betray us. What guarantees that?" Peter shot an irritated look at Jack. "Look, I'm already in deep enough trouble. The last thing I want is to make things worse." "That doesn't reassure me," Jack retorted. Evelyn intervened, trying to calm things down. "Jack, he knows we're all in the same boat now. If they succeed, no one here will be safe." Silence returned to the car, but the tension was palpable. Jack knew every passing minute brought them closer to an inevitable confrontation. When they finally spotted the power substation, the sight was intimidating. The area was surrounded by tall fences topped with barbed wire, lit by slowly sweeping floodlights. Several vehicles were parked nearby, suggesting the place was crawling with guards. "Looks like a fortress," Jack murmured, staring at the sight through the car window. "It's worse than I imagined," Marcus said, adjusting the radio in his ear. "They're probably monitoring everything around here," Evelyn commented. "We need a plan that doesn't involve getting caught before we're even inside." Peter, who appeared to be considering something, finally spoke up. "I can get you inside. There's a service entrance in the back that leads directly to the control room, but we'll need to disable the alarm first." "And how do we do that?" Marcus asked, frowning. Peter pointed to a small metal box beside the main gate. "That's the security hub. If we access the panel, we can disable the alarms without alerting anyone." Jack let out a nervous laugh. "That sounds easier said than done. That's why I need someone to cover me." Peter said, looking directly at Jack. Jack's eyes widened as he pointed to himself. Me? No way. Jack, Evelyn said, placing a hand on his shoulder. We need you. He can't do it alone. And you're the only one who understands enough about systems to help if something goes wrong. Jack let out a long sigh, his nervousness evident. Fine, but if this goes south, I want it on record that I told you so. While Marcus and Evelyn stayed hidden at a safe spot, Jack and Peter approached the security box near the main gate. Jack's heart pounded like a drum as he watched the floodlights sweep slowly across the area. Hurry up, he whispered as Peter knelt to open the box's panel. Jack kept watch, scanning for movement as Peter worked. The tension was nearly unbearable. Almost there, Peter murmured, adjusting wires inside the panel. Are they coming? Jack asked over the radio, his eyes glued to the road ahead. All clear so far, Marcus replied, but make it quick. Finally, Peter disconnected a wire, and the faint beeping sound stopped. Done. Alarms are disabled. Now we can go in. The two hurried back to where Evelyn and Marcus were waiting, and the group moved toward the rear entrance. Peter led the way, pointing out the path to the control room. This is the final stretch, he said, taking a deep breath. The control room is just ahead. All right, let's split up, Marcus said. Evelyn and Peter, you'll reconfigure the Nexus. Jack and I will stand guard. Jack glanced at Marcus, his reluctance clear on his face. You're making me a guard. I don't even have a weapon. Marcus gave a faint smile. You don't need one. Trust me. The group entered the facility, each step bringing them closer to the final confrontation. Time was running out, and everyone knew that one wrong move could mean the end. The control room was a cramped chamber filled with monitors displaying energy diagrams and lines of constantly moving data. Lights blinked on the panels, signaling that the systems were active. Evelyn and Peter rushed to position themselves around the main console, while Marcus and Jack stayed near the entrance, alert to any sign of danger. We need to access the system core and disconnect the Nexus from the network, Evelyn said, typing frantically on the keyboard. Peter, beside her, scanned the configurations with quick, precise eyes. They've set everything up for remote access. It won't be easy to disable without alerting them. Evelyn shot him a sharp look. Then make it work. Jack watched the scene, clearly nervous. Okay, while you guys are playing hackers, what exactly do we do if someone shows up? He asked Marcus. Marcus gave a faint smile. We handle it. Before Jack could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. Marcus raised a hand to signal silence and pulled Jack to the side of the door. They're coming, Marcus whispered, drawing a knife from his belt with unsettling precision. Jack swallowed hard, his heart racing. He gripped a tool he'd grabbed along the way, more out of instinct than strategy. Two armed men entered the room, their expressions serious as they scanned the space. Marcus moved like a shadow, taking down the first man with a quick, silent blow. The second tried to react but was intercepted by Jack, who, in a desperate move, struck the attacker with a wrench. Jack! Evelyn shouted, looking at him with wide eyes. Jack was breathing heavily, staring at the unconscious man on the floor. I told you this wasn't my thing, but I think I did pretty well, huh? Don't get used to it, Marcus said, moving to lock the door. It's only going to get worse. Evelyn turned her attention back to the console, where Peter was still working furiously. We're almost there, just one more minute. We don't have one more minute, Marcus replied, hearing more footsteps in the corridor. Things are about to get messy. The monitors flickered, and Evelyn finally let out a sigh of relief. Got it. The Nexus is disconnected. Peter pointed to one of the graphs on the screen. We've cut off remote control, but they can still try to regain access if they recover the remaining pieces. Evelyn shut the laptop firmly. Then we need to take this with us and destroy it completely. Marcus approached, his expression serious. It won't be easy to get out of here. They already know we're here. Jack looked at the exit and then at the bodies on the floor. So, what's the plan? Create a distraction, Marcus said. He looked at Peter. You know the security system. Any ideas? Peter nodded slowly, glancing at the monitors. We can overload the power system. It'll cause a temporary blackout in the facility. That'll give us time to escape. Evelyn hesitated, but that'll alert all the other networks. They'll know we were here. They already know we're here, Marcus snapped. Jack, grab the Nexus. We're splitting up to get out of here. Jack picked up the device, heavier than it looked, and glanced at Marcus. You're serious? Run where? Just trust me, Marcus replied. Peter activated the overload protocol, and the lights in the facility started flickering wildly. Within seconds, the entire building plunged into darkness. Evelyn turned on her phone's flashlight to illuminate the path as Marcus led the group down a side corridor. Stay together, Marcus whispered, his movements precise and deliberate. Jack stumbled on a step, but managed to regain his balance before falling. This would be so much easier if I were a soldier, you know? Evelyn smiled despite the tension. "You're doing better than we expected." Yeah, the group reached an emergency exit, but before they could open it, they heard voices echoing in the corridor behind them. "They're coming," Marcus said, looking at Jack and Evelyn. "Go. Now." "What about you?" Evelyn asked. "I'll slow them down. See you outside." Before Evelyn could protest, Marcus disappeared back into the corridor as Jack and the others slipped out through the exit. Outside, the group dashed through the darkness of the forest surrounding the facility. Spotlights from the building illuminated the trees, and distant voices could be heard. "They're on us!" Jack yelled, glancing back while clutching the Nexus. "Keep running!" Evelyn shouted. Peter, panting heavily, tripped over a branch and fell, but Jack helped him up. "Come on, man. If we stay here, we're dead." The sound of footsteps and barking search dogs grew louder, but the group managed to reach steeper terrain, slowing down their pursuers. Evelyn finally spotted the car they had parked far from the facility. "We're almost there," she said, pointing. They sprinted to the vehicle and Jack tossed the Nexus into the back seat before climbing in. Evelyn took the wheel and floored the accelerator as Peter and Jack clung to their seats. "What about Marcus?" Jack asked, looking back. Evelyn pressed her lips together, hesitating before answering. "He can handle himself. We'll wait for him at a safe spot." The car disappeared into the darkness as the lights of the facility still glimmered in the distance. The mission wasn't over, and they all knew the next step would be even more dangerous. The car sped down the deserted road, headlights cutting through the night as Evelyn gripped the wheel tightly. Jack, sitting next to her, kept glancing back, hoping in vain to see Marcus emerging from the forest. In the back seat, Peter held his head in his hands, his face a mixture of fear and exhaustion. "We can't just leave him there," Jack finally burst out, breaking the silence. "Jack, he knew what he was doing," Evelyn replied, her eyes fixed on the road. "Marcus was trained for this. Trained or not, he's outnumbered against those guys," Jack insisted, frustration evident in his voice. "Jack," Evelyn said, her tone softer now, "we have to trust he'll find a way out. Right now, our priority is getting the Nexus as far away from them as possible." Jack took a deep breath, fighting the urge to argue further. He knew Evelyn was right, but leaving Marcus behind left a gnawing feeling of guilt in his chest. After nearly an hour of driving, Evelyn pulled the car onto a secondary road surrounded by tall trees. She cut the engine and turned to Jack and Peter. "We need to figure out our next move." She glanced at the Nexus in the back seat. "We can't keep it with us. So, what's the plan?" Jack asked, crossing his arms. Evelyn pointed to a map on the car's dashboard. "There's an abandoned warehouse about 30 miles from here. We can hide the Nexus there temporarily." Peter, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "And what if they find us before that? They have resources, trackers, even drones." Jack turned to him, clearly irritated. "Got any brilliant suggestions, considering you're the one who got us into this mess?" Peter hesitated, but eventually shook his head. "No. I just don't think hiding it is the solution." Evelyn stared at Jack. "What do you think?" Jack let out a deep sigh. He knew his response carried significant weight. "If we leave the Nexus behind, they'll find it. The only way to solve this is to destroy it completely." "We can't do that," Peter exclaimed. "The Nexus is a technological breakthrough. It's revolutionary." Evelyn cut him off, her voice firm. "It's also a weapon, and a weapon that should never have been created." Peter slumped back in his seat, realizing his stance was indefensible. "All right, so how do we destroy this thing?" Jack asked, now looking directly at Evelyn. Evelyn thought for a moment before responding. "We need equipment capable of disintegrating its components. There's a test unit at Harper Industries in Atlanta, but it's far, and they're probably already tracking us." Jack let out a dry laugh. "So we're driving straight into danger." "Fantastic." As they debated their next move, the sound of an approaching car interrupted their conversation. Jack immediately glanced at the rearview mirror, his heart racing. "We've got company," he said, pointing to the headlights in the distance. Evelyn started the engine again, ready to flee, but Jack raised his hand. "Wait, it might be Marcus." "Or not," she replied, her eyes fixed on the headlights. The vehicle stopped a few meters away, and a figure slowly stepped out, walking toward their car. When the person stepped into the beam of light, Jack exhaled in relief. "It's Marcus." Evelyn got out of the car and ran toward him. "Are you okay?" she asked, quickly scanning him. Marcus nodded, though he was visibly injured. "They caught up with me, but I managed to lose them," he said, gesturing toward their car. "You were smart to keep moving." Evelyn helped him into the back seat. "We have a plan, but it's risky." Marcus managed a slight smile, despite his obvious pain. "Risky is the only kind of plan we ever have, right?" The group decided to head to Atlanta, knowing the only way to end this mission was to destroy the Nexus once and for all. The journey was tense, with everyone on high alert for any signs of pursuit. When they arrived at Harper Industries, They snuck inside using old codes Evelyn still remembered. The facility was partially decommissioned, which made accessing the testing lab easier. "This is it," Evelyn said, pointing to a large machine in the center of the room. This disintegrator was designed to eliminate defective prototypes. It can destroy the Nexus completely. Marcus scanned the room while Jack and Peter helped Evelyn set up the machine. The Nexus was placed into a metallic chamber, and Evelyn began the destruction process. "How long is this going to take?" Jack asked, glancing anxiously at the door. "About 5 minutes," Evelyn replied, watching the progress bar on the screen. But before she could say anything else, an alarm blared. "They're here," Marcus said, getting ready for the final showdown. Armed men burst into the facility, and Marcus immediately opened fire to cover the group. Jack, grabbing a metal rod, fought to protect Evelyn and Peter as the enemies closed in. "We're out of time!" Jack yelled. Evelyn glanced at the progress bar, which showed 90%. Just a few more seconds. One of the men got dangerously close, but Marcus took him down, even though he was exhausted and injured. He looked at Evelyn and Jack, his expression saying it all. "Take whatever you can and get out of here. I'll handle them." "No!" Evelyn screamed, but Marcus was already blocking the entrance, giving the group the chance to escape. Jack grabbed Evelyn by the arm. "We've got to go. He knows what he's doing." They slipped out through the side exit as gunfire echoed through the building. The Nexus was completely destroyed, but the cost of ensuring everyone's safety had been high. Days later, Evelyn, Jack, and Peter were back at the cabin reflecting on everything that had happened. The Nexus was gone, but Marcus's sacrifice still weighed heavily on their hearts. "He saved our lives," Evelyn said, looking at Jack, "and he gave us a chance to fix all of this." Jack nodded. "The least we can do is make sure something like that never happens again." Peter, now visibly regretful, agreed. "If I can help stop anything like that from ever happening again, I'll do whatever it takes." Evelyn looked at the two of them, her determination renewed. "Let's make sure of it." Months had passed since the Nexus was destroyed. Life in Willow Creek seemed to have returned to normal, but for Jack, Evelyn, and Peter, the scars of that experience hadn't faded. Jack had returned to his routine at the shop, but something had changed. The nights he spent alone tuning engines and fixing systems were often interrupted by memories of what he'd been through. He thought about Marcus, the sacrifice he'd made, and Evelyn, who now quietly led the fight against the aftermath of a device that should never have existed. One morning, while adjusting the suspension on a truck, he heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. He stood up, wiping his hands on a grease-stained rag, surprised to see Evelyn stepping out of a black sedan. "Evelyn, what are you doing here?" he asked, walking toward her. She smiled, but her eyes carried a mix of sadness and hope. "I came to say thank you, Jack, for everything." Jack crossed his arms, trying to hide his smile. "I didn't do anything you wouldn't have done for me." "You did more than you realize," she replied. "Marcus believed in something bigger, and now it's our responsibility to keep going with what he started." Jack frowned. "What does that mean?" Evelyn took a deep breath. "Harper Industries is undergoing a big shift. I'm turning what my father built into something more transparent, safer. We're working to make sure technologies like the Nexus never end up in the wrong hands again." "And where do I come in?" he asked, curious. She shrugged, a small smile on her face. "I thought maybe I could use your help. Someone with a knack for solving problems, you know?" Jack chuckled. "I'm not really good with big organizations. I prefer engines and grease." "And you also preferred staying out of trouble," Evelyn reminded him. "But when we needed you, you didn't hesitate. Think about it." She handed him an envelope before heading back to her car. Jack took it, still unsure but curious. "I'm not saying I'm in," he said as she got into the car. "I wouldn't expect anything less from you, Jack," she replied with a smile. The car drove off, leaving Jack standing in the workshop's driveway, staring at the envelope in his hands. He opened it and found a small card with an address and a handwritten note. "Sometimes the world needs ordinary people to do extraordinary things." Sans, what about you? What would you do if you were in Jack's shoes? Would you answer the call for a new adventure or return to a quiet life in Willow Creek? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this thrilling journey, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. We bring you exciting stories almost every day, so click on the links on the screen to explore more incredible adventures. See you next time.